Hello my dear friends, you're in the military summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The situation is getting worse and worse, and first let's talk about the Odessa region. According to information we have, Odessa is without power. A power facility in Odessa was struck by the Russian army overnight. The consequences of the strike are being investigated. The city has been experiencing a blackout for several weeks amid prolonged outages in Odessa. Residents of buildings without power continue to block streets. People are taking to the roadway demanding that power be restored. The blockades are causing conflicts with drivers who are unable to pass through the blockade areas. So when talking about Odessa, first of all, we're talking about just about power outages. So this is the only crisis situation here. But when talking about the city of Kyiv, there are much more problems. There are problems with electricity, heat, water, and with frost. The mayor of Kyiv, Klitschko, called on Kyiv residents to leave the city due to the energy crisis. Kyiv only has about half the electricity it needs. So this is not the beginning of the official evacuation of the city of Kyiv. As of now, the mayor is just calling people to do this, but we need to understand that after the next massive missile and drone attack that most likely is going to happen within the next days, the authorities of Ukraine will most likely will announce the mass evacuation of the capital of Ukraine due to power outages. The mayor of Kyiv also emphasized that this is the first time in the history that during such severe frost, a large parts of Kyiv has been left without heat and with a huge electricity shortage. So as you can see, today is the 17th of January 2026, and the Kyiv's authorities haven't managed to finish the restoration of the energy, let's say, infrastructure of the city of Kyiv. And at the same time, we continue receiving reports that the Russians are about to finish the preparation before another massive missile and drone attack. For example, Zelensky yesterday has issued a statement claiming that Russia is preparing for another large-scale combined missile and drone attack on Ukraine. Last time he did this, there was an attack the same day. However, there will be no attack tonight as Russian preparations are not complete yet, but the Russians are about to finish them. At the same time, Zelensky believes that he can stop the war. According to him, the Ukrainian delegation has departed for the United States for talks. Zelensky also announced it includes Umerov, Budanov, and Arachmiya. So the delegation of the United States of Ukraine is traveling to the United States of America, where today they're going to have probably the most important meeting since the beginning of the special military operation, because Zelensky and the delegation of Ukraine is going to make their proposal. Most likely they're going to make some concessions. I would like to remind you that yesterday we had a lot of interesting articles and updates on this matter. If you remember, there was a meeting between the president of Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, and Zelensky himself, and according to the statements that were made by them, Ukraine is ready to make some concessions about the Donbas region in exchange for joining the European Union. Furthermore, this is the most important statement, that at the same briefing, Czech President Petr Pavel stated that Ukraine is prepared to make a number of painful concessions to achieve peace without specifying their content. He noted that Kyiv has already done much to ensure a possible solution is acceptable, provided it leads to an end to the war. So the delegation most likely is traveling to the United States of America with the purpose to give the states their final proposal, which most likely will be later transferred to the Russian Federation. The Russians will consider this final proposal, and then the Russians will make a decision whether to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones or not. But telling the truth, the Russians most likely understand that all these things with talks, all these things with another peace process could be just a part of a very big game from Ukrainian side. So telling the truth, I believe, and most likely the attack will take place. And this can lead to unpredictable consequences. The Russians are preparing for new massive strikes. We have such information from intelligence. But some sources are saying that Russians this time are not not going to attack the energy infrastructure of Kyiv. Some sources believe that the Russians are going to attack the western part of Ukraine and energy infrastructural objects in this area. So this can probably lead to the situation that Ukrainian authorities at the end will be able to stabilize the situation. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But as for the previous night, according to information we have, the Russians launched 115 drones, and the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to bring down 96 drones. So this is the situation. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction where the Russians continued their offensive operation. During the previous 12 hours, lots of interesting updates were recorded. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the east of the settlement by the name of Stepnogorsk. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This information was provided by a neutral mapper. According to information we have, according to his report, the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish almost complete control over the settlement by Pavlovka, and the Russians managed to break through the defenses of the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Novoyakovlevka. So according to these reports, the Russians most likely in coming days will establish complete control over the territory, and this will allow the Russians to enter the Orekhov operational space, and from these directions, from these positions, the Russians will continue offensive operation further towards the western outskirts of the city of Orekhov itself. Another important update is coming from the eastern Zaporozhye direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the map was adjusted. So these are the changes between the dates. This is the end of the 15th of January of 2026. This is the 16th of January, and this is the beginning of the 17th of January of 2026. The Russians, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, managed to improve their positions further in the western direction from the river of Gaichur. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking this fortified area that most likely was captured by the armored forces of the Russian Federation. Here we can see the moment how Russian soldiers were entering this stronghold. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that this dense network of the fortifications was secured by the armored forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, right before we started making this video, pro-Russian sources reported that the settlement of Priluki was also captured by the armored forces of the Russian Federation. So before the next video, we will adjust the map, and most likely we're going to show something like this. So all these territories would be colored in Russian favor. Now let's move further. Another important video was published from the area of the city by the name of Pavlograd. I would like to remind you that the city of Pavlograd is the key city in the entire Donbas defense operation of the armed forces of Ukraine, because the major parts of the Ukraine's logistics is going exactly through this area. And today we received this video published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see how a Russian drone was flying above the railway bridge, and the Russians are saying that the bridge was damaged or maybe even destroyed. So as you can see, the Russians are trying to show us the consequences of missile strikes or probably drone strikes. Anyway, according to this video, which is most likely very recent, Russians managed to damage the bridge, to damage the railways, which means that the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this road between the city of Pavlograd and the settlement of Lazova, because according to information we have, Ukrainians are using the city of Lazova and this railway logistic hub for further supply and support of the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. So we see that the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose to stop the logistics completely and not allow the Ukrainians to receive additional and necessary reinforcements and reserves during the battle for the city of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dobropolye direction. The situation in this area is very critical, but the sources are saying that the Russians are about to resume their offensive operation in this area. As of now, the Russians are concentrating huge amount of forces in the area of the settlements of Belitska, Rodinska. I would like to remind you that several days ago there was a meeting between the chief of the general staff of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, and the commanders of the group of forces center, which means that the group of forces center received their final orders, and in coming days we should expect a very powerful offensive operation carried out by Russians with the purpose to improve positions significantly further in the northern and the northwestern directions of the Donetsk region. Now let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. More and more sources are telling us that there are very heavy clashes for the settlement by the name of Ilinka, which is a part of the Konstantinovka agglomeration. So these are the changes between the dates. According to neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions between the villages of Stepanovka and Ilinka. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources reported that additional 3 lines were captured and secured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation between the villages of Ilinka and Berestov. So there are very heavy clashes exactly for this area, and it seems that the Russians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose to establish complete control over the territory along this red line. So this is a vital question for the Russians, because if they can't take these territories under control and to force Ukrainians to fall back further and deeper inside of the city of Konstantinovka, then from this configuration most likely we can start counting days before the fall of the city of Konstantinovka itself. So this battle for the city of Konstantinovka is the major battle of the late military winter campaign of the beginning of 2026. At the same time, the Russians continue improving their positions in the direction of the city of Slaviansk from many directions. The Russians, the neutral mappers, confirmed reports that were published yesterday by pro-Russian sources regarding the situation in the area of the village of Minkovka. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 15th of January, this is the end of the 16th of January, and this is the beginning of the 17th of January. We expect and believe that in coming days or even hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm Russian control over the territory. If Russian establish complete control over the territory, then they will continue offensive operation further towards the villages of Gogolubovka and Privilya. And once Russians take under control these 2 villages, this is going to be the end of the battle for this defense layer, which ends somewhere along this red line. And then Russians will begin the battle for the next defense layer that lays between the villages of Lipovka, Nikiforovka, Fedorovka, Druga, and Dibrova. And this is something like the last defense layer before the beginning of a very huge Slaviansk agglomeration, which includes the city itself, the settlement of Nikolaevka, and the settlement of Alexandrovka, which is the key defense city during the through the entire Slaviansk defense operation. So the Russians are advancing, and the Russians are pretty fast. At the same time, we have changes on the ground in the western part of the settlement by the name of Svyatopokrovska. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking soldiers of the armed forces of the Russian Federation to the west of the settlement of Svyatopokrovska. So this video confirms that the Russians have their positions there. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, several neutral mappers also clarified the situation in this area, and we see that the Russians are advancing further in the western direction. Currently, the battle for the settlement of Riznikovka is taking place. There are lots of strongholds, fortified areas around the village, and the Russians are trying to breach this territory. We start receiving updates from the city of Liman. According to information we have, the Russians launched their major offensive operation, and now the Russians are trying to improve their position significantly in the eastern, southeastern, and the southern parts of the city of Liman itself. So the Russians are tasked to get this red line from their current positions, and the Russians during the previous days managed to improve their position significantly. They are still very far to establish control over the territory along this red line, but the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose to make this as soon as possible. So this is the situation by the end of the 15th, this is the end of the 16th, and this is the beginning of the 17th of January of 2026. So one thing is clear, the battle for the city of Liman has begun. We are talking about a final assault operation. As for this area around the city of Konstantinovka, the situation continued deteriorating most of all for the Russian armed forces. Today, neutral mappers adjusted their maps again, showing that Ukrainians managed to restore control over the territories that they've lost since the probably late July of 2025 or something like this. As of now, we're not adjusting the map because we are waiting for additional clarifications, but I would like to remind you that according to the Minister of Defense, according to the commander of the Group of Forces West, the Russians control the city of Kupiansk completely, and the Russians are about to finish the battle for the city of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. As you can see, there's a very huge gap between positions of Russian headquarters and Ukraine's headquarters, which means that someone is lying, and most likely we will understand this in coming days. The Volchansk direction, the Russians continue moving slowly but step by step towards the main Ukraine fortified areas. Today we received the report that the Russians managed to encircle the village of Gravska, which is located along the river of Seversky Donets. The Russians resumed their offensive operation in the area of the settlement of Staritsa. The Russians are about to force the Ukrainians to leave the village towards this huge forest, and the Russians continue the battle, or finishing the battle, for the settlement of Volchansky Hutory. So the Russians are creating a very strong position on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. They're trying to create a very strong and powerful bridgehead before moving further and deep inside of the Kharkiv region. As for the settlement of Varvarovka, another important video was published by pro-Russian sources. Here we can see a Russian drone. Here we can see another drone that was blocked by some protection nets, but this drone managed to pass this defense layer successfully. Then this drone managed to discover explosives that were installed by Ukrainians. There are two drones even. And then the Russians destroyed these explosives, and the bridge was destroyed completely as well. So the Russians have destroyed the bridge with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional reinforcements and reserves in the direction of the villages in the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. So the destruction of this bridge, first of all, tell us that most likely the Russians in coming days are going to launch something like a special operation carried out by sabotage and reconnaissance group, and their main purpose would be to establish complete control over the villages and settlements on the northern side of the river of Volcha. So Russians most likely will intensify their activities in this area. Furthermore, during the previous night, Ukrainians launched another massive attack with drones deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and between 12 p.m. and 11 p.m. of Moscow time, the Ukrainians launched around 100 drones deep inside of the territory of Russia with the purpose to destroy or damage the objects of critical infrastructure. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. The Russians are about to finish the preparation before another massive missile strike. Ukrainians will transfer their concessions about the Donbas region to the Russian Federation through the American side. And within the next hours or days, we will understand whether the Russians are going to accept them, or they will deny it, or they will refuse. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.